I'm only going to stand here and introduce Professor Williams. I hope he will introduce himself in more detail, but I wouldn't dare to presume to have all the, insight that he has. So, Professor Williams, please come and talk to us.
An hour ago, I was ill, and then I heard the wonderful traditions. You touch my heart deeply, and your presence here is an amazing presence of the world's traditions and the world's faiths. Thank you. It is very great honor to speak at an IARF Congress. I'm deeply grateful and humbled by your trust. This year's theme, Faith and Reconciliation, was really designed for Archbishop Desmond Tutu's process and successes of reconciliation in South Africa. I cannot speak personally about reconciliation at any high level of success. So I will share with you what may be a humble beginning before specific talks that feature the work of our great examples. I will suggest that the process of remembrance, especially of failures, is an essential part of reconciliation as truth-telling, satyagraha, confession, and understanding of a conflict. Liberals too often glorify their successes and claim the high road and the high moral ground. Remembrance requires facing ambiguous results and failures. Sometimes we actually learn more from our failures than our successes. This Congress may be a moment of historic change. To guess whether or not that is possible, may I briefly summarize the changes over the last 122 years. IARF, we were born at the World Forum of Religion in 1893, marked by tolerance, dialogue, and appreciation of differences. From 1901 to 1913, with a name change in each Congress and dominated by British and American Unitarians, it was an era of liberal Christianity and optimism. The zenith of liberalism dashed by World War I. Following that war, a second period began with the Congress of Leiden in 1922, characterized by efforts for the prevention of all wars, ending in 1937 with World War II. After a pause, the third period of IARF began in 1949 with the Congress in Amsterdam, dominated by struggle against totalitarianism in Eastern Europe and a quest for peace among superpowers. Symbolically, that period ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall. A fourth period was shaped at the Congress in 2002. IARF remained an association after nearly being transformed into an agency. IARF was saved by Japanese member groups. Of special note, the Miyakes of Kokokyo. We may be beginning a fifth period, the Anthropocene, signaling imminent global threats with great danger for the planet no longer somewhere over the horizon. The war next door in Ukraine reminds us that violence does not bring peace at any level, whether international or personal. Hatred and revenge last lifetimes, generations, even millennia. Our discussions here could not be more timely. IARF has chosen to come together in this Congress to tackle the inherently multifaceted and dynamic process that reconciliation is. Superficially and habitually, we assume that this work presupposes two enemies that we can bring together and sit down at the same table for some kumbaya experience. This approach is naive, for the reality is convoluted and the forces are negative and stubborn. And yet, we trust the power of faith to bring about the catharsis of forgiveness, justice, and peace. It serves as a compass in conflict resolution, healing, and attainment of harmony. On the personal and interpersonal level, it manifests as a resolution of differences and restoration of trust in relationships, demanding genuine apologies, an admission of wrongdoing, and commitment to change. Simultaneously, it involves the act of forgiveness by the injured party, reshaping the relationship dynamic to alleviate resentment and foster progress. In the realm of psychology, reconciliation is a healing balm for the wounds inflicted by trauma and past adverse experiences, guiding individuals on a journey of introspection and growth. On the socio-political sense, reconciliation operates as a bridge, mending the rifts caused by past social injustices and political conflicts. Meanwhile, religious and spiritual reconciliation offers a way to restore relationships with the divine through confession, repentance, and forgiveness, as seen in Christianity's reconciliation with God, or Buddhism's focus on alleviating suffering. Faith and reconciliation affirms that we trust the process of bringing harmony to conflict and disorder. By saying that we have faith implies that we are committed to the task, even though the entire history of humanity questions its possibility. Each of our traditions testifies that it has powers to bring pacification of conflict that have brought just solutions when trusted. Remembering these events and the ways conflicts were resolved is why we have faith in our work for peace. As an academic historian, it should not come as a surprise that I think the process of reconciliation to be genuine, we first have to remember the past, the root causes of any conflict. We have to start with a deep analysis of the political, the historical, the cultural, and religious realities. They are deep-seated and centuries old, so we need to overcome both our habits and biology as the planet's top predator and polluter. IARF is an ideal laboratory for which these multi-dimensions, the cultural, religious, historical, are represented on a world stage
as we saw a few minutes ago. The theme of the Congress could not be more timely. Hidden and open conflicts, injustices concerning religious freedom slowly erode the trust and hope for generations. The danger that we forget the injustices instead of trying to remedy them. Nobel Peace Prize, and it was a survivor of Auschwitz, famously said, "To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time." He also said, "The opposite of love is not hatred, but indifference." Humanity seems to be suffering from the disease of indifference and amnesia for genocides, especially those that are cultural. For our historical memory is so short, and genocides and ethnicides in the world repeat as if we are performing a prediscovered script. Since I live in Hawaii and have been adopted as a native Hawaiian, I'm going to use a Hawaiian style of storytelling, mo'olelo, sharing examples of various methods and stages of reconciliation. And mo'olelo depends on you, the listener, for it to be meaningful and to contain wisdom that you bring to these stories. My first mo'olelo comes from a personal memory of my youth in 1949, South Georgia. My father was the community's preeminent figure, a minister in a local Southern Baptist church. 6 years before the gruesome murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American in Mississippi, for whistling at a woman. An all too commonplace event occurred in our community when a black man was accused of raping a white woman. The entire jury for the case was chosen from our congregation. My father had returned to the South after being a chaplain in World War II to work for changing the Southern culture to live by Christian principles of justice and equality for all. On the Sunday following the arrest, my father preached a compelling sermon. He emphasized the importance of presuming innocence until proven guilty and the Christian responsibility to pursue truth and justice. Despite being only 9 years old, I understood the indirect reference to the sheriff's boast that he had grabbed the first black man he could find. My father's sermon was heroic and direct. It was a direct challenge to the racist system based on intimidation, fear, and violence. That night, our meal at supper, that Southern word, was interrupted with a knock on the door. I was the closest to the door, and I ran there. I could close my eyes to see the sight on the front lawn of the parsonage, across burning men in sheets and hoods, the symbols of the Ku Klux Klan. My father grabbed me, sent my mother with my 2-year-old sister, my 7-year-old brother, and me to the back bedroom. He went outside to meet the mob. He was threatened, and the threats included our family. He chose to flee to protect us. 2 months later,
we found ourselves in Provo, Utah, nearly 3,000 kilometers away from the South. My father became a missionary to the Mormons. He never succeeded in converting one active Mormon to be a Southern Baptist. He did help apostate Mormons regain their faith again. And some even found a new faith. The consequence of the move for us children was to live as outsiders and face ridicule and loneliness. Where's the reconciliation in this story? Well, later I became the only non-Mormon member of the Mormon History Society, and I am very grateful for my friends in Utah who taught me to stand alone and to question and think for myself. The second Lelo is from ancient Hawaiian oral tradition. It goes back 1,800 years. And I want you to imagine you are there. We're in the Marquesas in the South Pacific. We're 2,500 kilometers. I can't do these kilometers and miles very well. Away from Hawaii, which could be our new home. The violence is so intense in the Marquesas that the danger of crossing that 2,500 kilometers is less than staying there. If you know Pacific storms, you know that the danger is very intense. Nature does not forgive mistakes, especially during violent storms. Survival depends on group responsibility, individual effort for far beyond anything ever experienced before the voyage. The values or principles can be called the ethics of the canoe, derived from long, open ocean voyages that required maximum cooperation, sharing, effort, peacefulness, conflict resolution, and expertise. This produced an appreciation and understanding of nature, a native science. That'll be in another story. The canoe ordeal seems to have been the origin of a special reconciliation process to solve conflicts on canoes and in the new land. This came to be known as ho'oponopono, making right again and again. The tradition is still alive today. When discord occurs in our community, or even between two persons, the ancient reconciliatory ritual of ho'oponopono is used. By virtue of respect for the elderly, kapuna, the participant, the wise elders and spiritual leaders preside over the process. Each participant is given the equal right to speak until a consensus is reached, one that is just. Many tribes and clans use an extension of this type of decision-making called the Amma, a council that decides larger issues like managing communal resources of water, forest, and the ocean. There's a sister Mololelo in Japan. The Japanese lay Buddhist faith, Risho Kosekai, sometimes translated as a society for establishing righteousness and friendly relations. Already the name symbolizes what this Congress is working to study and to attain. Risho Kosekai has been a key supporter of IARF, and we all know their extraordinary generosity and service. They've always been among the first to bring help to countries ravaged by war or natural disasters. Many of us have witnessed the special practice of bringing harmony to people and community, the process called Hoso. After each daily worship service in their church, congregants come together and sit in circles. Hoso's spontaneous group counseling, which is an appreciation of faith that is central and strictly applied to problem solving. Each group is led by a professional counselor, also a member of the congregation. This is a model for deep compassion and caring for each other. Participants bring their everyday difficulties before the group, and they try to find solutions based on the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. I actually had the privilege of making a video about Hoso. The next mo'olelo is controversial among Hawaiians, native Hawaiians, that is. Tourists call themselves Hawaiians too. That is a split among those who think one must beat violence with force and those who believe that violence breeds violence. In India, it is said that Gandhi would not have succeeded against British colonialism and imperialism without the violence of Boers and the terrorists. This story, however, is about Hawaiian's Queen Liliuokalani and her use of Gandhi's methods 30 years before Gandhi. The Kingdom of Hawaii had become a Christian nation, with treaties recognizing the sovereignty of by more than 40 nations, including the Kingdom of Hungary and the United States. Hawaii declared itself a neutral nation, allowing no ships of war to use its harbors. Despite its treaties with the Kingdom of Hawaii, the United States wanted Hawaii as a neighbor base in its war against Spain to take Guam and the Philippines. In 1893, the USS Boston aided proxies to install a puppet government of plantation owners and immediately recognized them as the Republic of Hawaii. They put Hawaii's beloved Queen Liliuokalani under house arrest for years. The Queen forbade the kingdom's military to shed blood in her defense. She believed that the United States government would right the wrong of occupying a neutral and sovereign nation with whom they had a treaty of non-aggression. Queen Liliuokalani's protest to President Cleveland blended two traditions of reconciliation: Sermon on the Mount Christianity, Matthew 5, and the ethics of the canoe. President Clinton, a few years ago, also apologized, and neither of these apologies did any good. Remarkably, Native people do not seem to harbor animosities toward their U.S. colonizers. The reason can be found in the guiding principle of aloha. It is more than a greeting. It reflects the powerful spiritual capacity, compassion, and unconditional acceptance of the other, be they foreign or even the enemy. Now I would like to share a mo'olelo of successful resolution, although it depends on whether you are rooting for Western progress or for Hawaiian traditions. There was a contest between myth, science, religion, militarism, and plain naked capitalism. A couple of years ago, on the sacred volcano of
Mauna Kea, workers started constructing another enormous telescope without proper permits. This mountain is as sacred for Hawaiians, native Hawaiians, as Fujiyama is for Japanese. Hawaiians hold that the mountain peak of Mauna Kea is the meeting place between heaven and earth. A dozen telescopes were already there. Bulldozers lined up, and so did protesters. Thousands of indigenous Hawaiians were arrested, but they stopped construction. Your IARF member, Kolozsvar, influenced the outcome. Kumu Lenkila, whom you met at the Birmingham Congress, was there and helped the protesters frame the issue so that contract practice would be seen as an issue of the right to practice one's religious faith. Forget political and property rights. Hawaiians do not win court cases about cultural genocide or title to sacred land. They stopped the desecration of Mauna Kea with natural worship sites and graveyards for so long that the so-called old-fashioned telescope, land-based, went to another part of the world. I think it was the Canary Islands. Even when Kupuna, our elders, in wheelchairs were arrested, there was no violence. Hapu aloha. It means simply, the rule is aloha. The rule is love. There are lots of irony in the struggle between one of history's most naturalistic native people trying to make modern astronomers and their commercial and military sponsors follow just laws, respect local culture, and practice moral science. You know which side I'm on. Anyway, reconciliation is also needed halfway around the world, from Hawaii to here in Kolozsvar. As an adopted Hawaiian, my home after retirement, Transylvania adopted me, for it is the homeland of my wife, Dr. Unit Gallia, Zizi, as we call her. By the way, we met at another IARF Congress at Stanford in 1987. The next year, our friends, the Bokies from Berkeley, married us. The Bokies also met at an IARF Congress. I guess these are not examples of reconciliation or conflict resolution. Now I wish to examine different models of reconciliatory work specific to Transylvania. This model begins with a model of conflict resolution in what is often called the Holy Land of Unitarians. Unitarianism was born here as an indigenous Hungarian faith 455 years ago. Now imagine yourselves in the Middle Ages, in the time of the religious wars and the Inquisition. In such a precarious time, a religious genius, Francis David, persuades a king to try religious freedom, tolerance, and freedom of conscience. The king could have followed the practice of the time, whose realm, their religion, meaning that the people must practice the religion of their ruler. The king was John Sigismund, and the counselor, David Ferenc. The king gave his subjects the freedom of religious choice in the famous Edict of Torah. in 1568. The Unitarian Church was born and was considered the most radical wing of the Protestant Reformation. Unfortunately for medieval Europe, the king and his attempt at allowing religious freedom ended abruptly with his suspicious death, and persecution of Unitarianism began. Tolerance accommodated both majority and minority religions. This approach taught compromise as a positive value, even trying to appreciate religious differences. It would be centuries before the practice of ecumenism brought tolerance among different Christian bodies. IARF expanded the concept to include all faiths who sought and practiced compassion, openness to others, and to all of life. Pope Francis showed a great example of this spirit when he visited Hungary this spring. For a second time, he insisted on meeting all representatives of the country's main churches and synagogues and praised them. So tolerance can be considered a middle way, a wisely accommodated compromise. Now let me continue with a couple of stories from modern Transylvania. One of Eastern Europe's most brutal communist dictatorships occurred here. Zizi and I returned to Transylvania the summer after Ceausescu was overthrown. One of our projects was to help groups of ministers trust each other again. They were all neighboring ministers. The Romanian secret police coerced many to become its informers, claiming that one, or at least history has showed, not 1 in 4, but 1 in 160 were actually involved with the Securitate. Fear dominated society and corrupted people. Out of fear, people spied and reported on their colleagues, friends, and family. Those who resisted and refused to cooperate were arrested and shoveled into political prisons like the Romanian Gulag. At one time, 50,000 intellectuals, mainly intellectuals, were imprisoned in Romania, and not all survived. One of them was my wife's father, Reverend Henry Gallion, a great Transylvanian Unitarian scholar minister. He lived by his principles, refused collaboration, and thus sacrificed himself and his family. In a communist show trial, he was sentenced to 7 years of political prison with an additional 5 years of loss of his civil rights. And upon his release, he was an old, broken man at 43 years old. He chose to stand firm and was crushed. My father chose to flee. But Imre Gallion's political persecution continued even after prison, and a second arrest was in sight. So on his 60th birthday, he ended his own life as an ultimate protest against dehumanization. He must have also feared that more torture would have eventually broken him and coerced him to harm others. Imre Gallion chose active martyrdom. 10 years after his death, Ceausescu's regime was overthrown, and the secret police archives opened, and a shocking reality came to light. Imre Gallion's dossier of surveillance was 1,400 pages long. His Securitate pseudonym was the Prophet. The dossier shed light on his betrayers, friends, minister colleagues, trusted parishioners. While alive, he was only aware of certain church officials' roles of his imprisonment. systematically destroying his career. Yet he insisted that he was unable to hate even those who ruined him and his family. He had to forgive them. After all, he wrote, what is faith about if it is not about forgiveness? With a group of ministers, we climbed to a hill overlooking their churches in the Homerode Valley. We sat in a circle and we called it a workshop of reconciliation. They wrote down their fears, hurts, grudges, betrayals on small sheets of paper. And when they were ready to forgive even themselves, they burned the papers in a small fire in the middle of the circle. I actually became aware of the stunning fact that they suspected one another. But both sides had kept their personal secrets until the workshop. Collaborators may be called cowards, and also they're casualties of their own making. It took hours of agony for our ministers on the hilltop to face the worst of themselves and facing their victims. Then I taught them meditation, and there was a deep catharsis that happened that afternoon. These people of faith formed a new relationship in the spirit of forgiveness. The next Moholelo still continues with another scenario of forgiveness, that of Imre Geliad's daughter, my wife, Judith Geliard. Because of a family's tragedy in which some church officials may have been involved and been instrumental, it would have been logical for her to harbor resentment, even hatred. Yet she chose a radical forgiveness in the spirit of her father. She gave up her medical practice and dedicated herself to carry on her father's broken dreams and serve their Unitarian Church as a volunteer for almost 20 years. She organized the partner church movement between American churches, American Unitarian Universalist, and Hungarian churches, connecting as many as 140 congregations on both sides of the Atlantic. This was officially recognized as one of the largest and most hardening movements of the Unitarian Universalist Church, along with the civil rights movement. After 5 years, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Starr King School for the Ministry in Berkeley. She later graduated from Boston University Theological School and was ordained a Unitarian minister in Transylvania. The movement was institutionalized, then became institutionalized as the Unitarian Partner Church Council, in which she served as General Secretary and as its honorary president. The blessings of American generosity can be found 30 years later here in Transylvania. Among our numerous projects, we publish all of Geliad Imre's writings, and so praiseworthy, Risho Kosekai contributed substantially toward the purchase of a printing press for a church that had not had one for centuries. The generous grant was hand-delivered by Reverend Masatoshi Kono in a memorable, very memorable crossing of the border from Hungary into Romania. Reverend Danish Farkash, our driver, got us through that border. In 1995, Reverend Imre Geliad received justice when the United Theological School of Kolozsvar posthumously awarded him an earned title of Doctorate of Sacred Theology. In interfaith dialogue, words and ideas often need a type of reconciliation. Words like liberal and conservative. As I had mentioned, Transylvanian Unitarianism was the most radical and liberal wing of the Reformation. And they are proud of their liberal religious history and identity. Of course, history has not been kind to them. So most of the 455-year chronicles all kinds of persecution, but they fiercely safeguarded and preserved their identity as liberal Christians. So are Hungarian Unitarians liberal or conservative? This is an almost nonsensical question for non-Unitarian members of IARF. But it is a lesson for all of our interfaith conversations. Within each of our traditions, there are intra-faith differences. The big one between Mahayana and Theravada, sometimes called Hinayana, the little vehicle. There's the difference between Sufis and the other branches of Islam. And I could go on with all of the intra-faith misunderstandings and lack of tolerance. There is need for reconciliation everywhere. So it's time for a look at how liberal has changed. And we'll see it in another Mo'olelo when we get to Japan, because liberal has now become almost libertine in some of its understandings. Liberal versus conservative is not a mere semantic issue. It is a matter of loyalty and identity. And since the term is so sociologically and religiously divisive, we can follow the 16th century Hungarian Unitarian idea of tolerance, tolerating each other's views as a type of reconciliation. Before moving from Eastern Europe for Japan, a brief Mo'olelo, which will only require you remembering one word: Trianon. Sometimes a historical injustice is so blatant and so brutal that even the attempt at reconciliation is inappropriate and only increases the pain of the victims. Such is a dictate of Trianon of 1920, when the Allied powers chopped up the Kingdom of Hungary. Thus, it lost 2/3 of its territory and population to its neighboring countries. Transylvania was given to Romania, other territories to Ukraine, Slovakia, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, and Austria. And Hungarians have been oppressed and persecuted minority in all of these countries except Austria. The cruel joke in Hungary: it is the only country that borders with itself all the way around. My last Mo'olelo is almost an epic compared to the previous ones. It's about institutional memory and my Unitarian friends here are not going to appreciate an academic historian's analysis. Anyway, the translators are not going to appreciate this ad lib either. Sorry to them. It is about the Japanese American mission and Dr. Shinichiro Yamaoka, apostle of free religion. Any historical or personal remembrance of Japan's joining IARF will remember Dr. Yamaoka, even as fewer of us knew him personally. I only knew him the last 7 years of his life, as he died in 1988 at 106. One of my wife's great privileges was to spend hundreds of hours with him and being able to record that life and his teachings. That was a great privilege, a gift from the universe that I can memorialize Yamaoka Sensei at an IAP Congress on his 35th anniversary of his death. Being in his presence was unique. He radiated a inner peace and wisdom, holding nothing negative. He turned almost any question into a moment of self-reflection for the questioner. He became a magic mirror that created a vision of what my best self could be. Imaoka Sensei was an enigmatic human being whom Buddhists called a bodhisattva, Shintoists a living kami, Christians a virtual saint, religious liberals and scholars sometimes called him the Emerson of Japan. Imaoka's egoless personality masked the extraordinary roles he played in national and international stage of progressive movements and institutions of 20th century. He received 2 imperial awards in education that none knew except his family. A famous journalist called him the most spiritual and egoless person he had ever met. Imaoka was not only a witness to radical changes, but instrumental in many major intellectual movements in Japan. For example, he joined Japanese Unitarianism in Tokyo in 1910. Unitarian was a new word in Japanese, meaning progressive. Japanese Unitarians gathered in a magnificent building that had been a gift to the Japanese people from international contributions in 1894. Every aspect of Japanese culture was in process of transition from versions of feudalism into modern society. It is hard to imagine one location with so many wise elders, famous philosophers, and brilliant future leaders returning from their studies abroad. Imaoka returned from his study at Harvard University. Collectively, they made Unity Hall this gift from the world and partly from Unitarians, made that the most dangerous place for change in Japan, according to a police report of the time. They had a chance of creating a democratic people, a parliamentary government with a just monarch, universal suffrage, powerful peace movement, with Japan leading disarmament in the League of Nations. The United States didn't join, by the way, and killed it. A type of religious and ethical socialism, and much more. Some of their members were already serving in Parliament, including the founder of Ito-In, Teiko-san. And some of you recognize, yes, Ito-In, a member of IARF, and leading in this transformation. Imaoka Sensei was executive secretary of the Japanese Unitarian Association, and when Boston in 1922 sent a new director to end everything that was not strictly religious from the Boston perspective. They thought Bolsheviks had stolen their mission in Japan. What frightened American Unitarian headquarters was a religious liberalism it would not even try to understand. Japanese Unitarians were leading progressive ideas and activities such as Christian socialism, radical publications, work for labor and women's rights, ethical culture, and a dozen more highly successful programs that embodied the principles of free religion. The American missionary director came, locked the doors of Unity Hall, and froze the funding. All Japanese Unitarian programs were threatened. So Imaoka and the Japanese Unitarian Association unanimously voted to tell the American mission to go home and not send any more missionaries. Unitarian was the last secretary that wrote the goodbye letter. But the real disaster followed. The deed of Unity Hall as a foreign property was held by the American Unitarian Association in Boston. Despite the hall being given as a gift, Boston just sold the building to commercial use and kept the money. Japanese Unitarians and their affiliate partners had lost their gathering place, their critical mass, their combined witness at a crucial moment of social and political transformation, their ability to resist Japan's race toward fascism and war. Why did I tell you this sad story? Liberal religionists are not always on the right side of history. American Unitarians had wedded democracy to capitalism and were blind to the insights coming from their Japanese sisters and brothers. The Japanese Unitarians were raising questions about inequities in all spheres: cultural, economic, gender, political, and more. Sermon on the Mount Christianity had led to free religion, united new Buddhist and liberal Shintoist. Everything new, something new had been created, but its life was short. Again, we face another problem in reconciliation, except this time is institutional memory. Should we try to reconcile an institution's conscience with its own past needs? Imaoka Sensei never spoke or complained of this past. He would tell me nothing about it. He rather celebrated the American Unitarian president, Dana Greeley, and Risha Kosei's founder, Nikio Niwano, and many Buddhist and Shinto individuals and groups into IARF. I wrote Cosmic Sage. By the way, these are free for you on the materials area of the website, including Kugo Glenn Keeler's book on Hawaiian spirituality as well. I wrote that thinking that there must be lessons that could be learned in Japan. Since my friend Spencer Laban had written about the Unitarian mission in India with the Brahma Samaj and that mission's failure there, no lessons were learned. Let me reflect briefly on an unusual spirituality of Imaoka. Considering Japan's apostle of free religion, for him, Jiyu Shukyo, free religion, meant going beyond particular religions, beyond Unitarianism, beyond liberal religion, beyond any ism, to free religion. Freedom, Jiyu, required something more to guide one toward truth, the good, the beautiful. Something toward becoming truly human, that cosmic being he sought to become, but never claimed to reach. Not yet. Free religion is neither a new religion ranking among existing religions or a unification of them. It was Imaoka's conclusion that there is no difference between the secular and sacred when it is committed to freedom, justice, learning. This is a spirituality that is a lesson for life. He liked to call all of life a university from which we do not graduate. Growing beyond, that was his favorite koan. Never arriving, achieving, attaining. Only learning, becoming, freely creating the new and the better. And we can add to that the more just and the more true. He himself remained Christian, Buddhist, and Shintoist, each having made a distinct and continuing contribution to his life. None was better or higher, he said. Each has a way of knowing the sacredness of life. He did not mix them, but knew and lived each faith in its own integrity. Imaoka Sensei called IARF to be more of an organization, to be more than an organization about religious freedom. He said often that every religious tradition can be free religion. In other words, a liberating spirituality. Even those not called religion, like the arts, music, economics, even politics. IARF or IARF, free religion, could lead in teaching us the many ways of religious traditions can enable our becoming true human beings. Imaoka was striving that IARF should become an organization of free religionists. It should not be more than an association of religious freedom. He thought the full name of IARF should be changed to the International Association for Free Religion, and the time seemed to come at the Tokyo Congress in 1984. Let my next Olelo disturb you as it disturbs me. And it warns how much attention and dedication to encounter, dialogue, and understanding is needed for interfaith reconciliation. It happened in a small room in Tokyo, IARF Congress in 1984. Rishoku Sekai had wished to honor Dr. Imaoka's request for a name change from an association for religious freedom to one of free religion. But RKK needed to know that the name change would not be offensive to Buddhism. Remember, freedom is a kind of an American idea, at least it got it from a French or somebody. And they wanted a workshop. And Dieter Gitteman came to me and asked, would I chair a workshop and allow Dr. George Marshall to present the UUA's understanding of free religion. I met with Marshall at lunch. He was 3 decades my senior, and shared with him the importance of this panel and the worry that free religion meant either individualism or libertinism or both. Marshall was an old firebrand of the civil rights movement, greatly respected for his courage and work. For whatever reason, he ignored the situation and presented one of his favorite sermons about medieval heretics, martyrs, and libertines. Well, he preached the American gospel of individualistic freedom. The very reason for the session was to relieve Rishoku Sekai members of the feeling of Imaoka's free religion, Jiu-Shukyo, was immoral, that Jiu could be understood as libertine freedom. The panel was a disaster, as it was concluded that free religion was a term that no Asian religionist could ever affirm. Imaoka's dream of getting IARF to broaden its focus to the understanding and study of liberating spirituality was not even voted upon, nor the renaming of IARF to the Association for Free Religion. It was heartbreaking for me, but Imaoka Sensei generously forgave those who didn't even think of asking for forgiveness. He comforted me instead. 2 nights later, Imaoka Sensei gave the closing address for the entire 1984 Congress. It was remarkable in 2 ways. He put aside his Japanese notes and spoke extemporaneously in English at 103. His speech was carefully written, but he did it as an impromptu speech. Not a word of disappointment of his final wish that had been rejected was spoken. I recommend to you also the study of Napoca's life and teachings, as Reverend Andrew James Brown, minister of Cambridge Unitarian Church, is currently doing. He is leading his congregation to become a free religious fellowship, a liberating spiritual community. By concluding, Mo'olelo memorializes the IARF's legendary personality, Dr. Yukitaka Yamamoto, chief priest of Sabaki Grand Shrine. He would be 100 years old now. For the first time in Shinto history, he opened his shrine and shared Shinto values and ceremonies with the world. At the time of our IARF Congress at Budapest in 2002, Yamamoto Guji was gravely ill and unable to attend. Yet, he followed the events of the Congress and learned of its financial crisis. Then, Yuji Inokuma, himself a key personality of IARF, conveyed the public announcement, Yamamoto Guji's passionate last message from his deathbed: don't let IARF fail. He died the next day. His daughter, sitting at Guji's side, heard his last words: is IARF all right? IARF has an even greater mission now. Our planet has entered the Anthropocene era, which will dictate changing climate. Our science has produced something equally dangerous: intelligent machines and robots with skills that now equal our own. The elite are already planning their survival without the masses. We truly need to combine all our survival skills, all our methods for conflict resolution. Only together can we in IARF provide the light to lead the way with liberating spiritualities that will minister to and possibly heal the pain, suffering, fear, and loss of meaning that is just over the horizon. We will, you and I will, choose to be champions of reconciliation or not. Now is the moment for us to live the highest ideals of our spiritual traditions. Now is the time for this association to be dedicated to a liberating religion, liberating spiritualities with the spirit of helping us become true human beings. Now is the time for us to walk with the elders of our movement and to unite together in remembering the root causes of our crises, learning what we do not know, and transcending past failures to live lives of beauty, righteousness, and truth. Mo'olelo. It's over. Thank you.
Professor Williams, thank you very much for your keynote speech, your presentation. I was wondering, how can I describe it for myself in one sentence? And I think it was like a lens, collecting all the rays falling on them. And while it collects all the rays of thought and happening and of history, it presents a picture to us. This picture can be provocative. We might have arguments, or we might even argue some of the things that have been presented. We might have questions, and obviously that is the role of such a speech to talk about. But I think it helps many of us to understand more and indeed understand history as the possibility of reconciliation. Thank you very much for that. Dear guests, partners, siblings, thank you very much for your presence here. I am quite certain that Professor Williams will be quite happy to talk to and discuss the different issues and maybe answer questions during our Congress. Unfortunately, the time given to this opening service is over. So thank you for being present here with us today. Our Congress will continue tomorrow. Yet before the people who are here in the church would leave and the members of the Congress and the guests would go to the auditorium in the Unitarian High School, we would invite everybody to come forward here around the Lord's table to make a picture, to take a picture of all of us present here. We would like to ask the religious leaders who were kind enough to come here and be present and celebrate with us this very important moment for our church and for the larger IARF community to stand around the Lord's table. And we invite and encourage everybody here in the church to come forward and stand here so our young photographers could take beautiful pictures. And maybe decades after, when some of us will be delivering a keynote speech, then we could remember the picture taken at the Kolozsvar Congress and mark it as a very important step in the history of IARF. So please come forward.